Welcome to the second episode of Bad Apple. That's right, it's November's episode, and it's basically like an arty chat show where I get to interview really cool people, really cool writers who I like, and they tell me some stuff, and then we get to hear some poems or bits of stories. You may have noticed that I have indeed got a Joan of Arc haircut. You might think Elvis is alive somewhere. Well, Joan of Arc is alive in Wigan. Or like my partner did say, I looked a little bit like He-Man, which I'm going to take, ripped. No. Okay, I'll shut up now. So I'd like our first guest, I'll tell you a little bit about him and then I'll bring him on. Our first guest is Qudsia Bailey. Qudsia Bailey is a poet and a playwright and an educator. I met him at Slam, at Poetry Slam, and I thought it was amazing. He's recently become Birmingham's Poet Laureate. What is a Poet Laureate like? We've heard of them. What do they do? And he also got commissioned to write some stuff by Peaky Binder, for Peaky Blinders, by the BBC. Anyway, he'll tell us a little bit about that. So let's welcome to the stage, to our screens, it's Qudsia Bailey. Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm really good, Casey. It's so lovely to see you. So welcome to my crazy new show. It's not really that crazy. I just want to make it sound more exciting. Tell us, what should we start with? What do you want to talk about first? Do you want to tell me a bit about the Peaky Blinders stuff? Because that's like famous.
Yeah. It came about. The story of how it came about is actually quite boring. But what happened before, it's a bit weird. So in the build up to Channel 4 moving up north, as it did, there was like a process to try and get Channel 4 to come to different regions, and we wanted it in the Midlands. And so I was asked to write something to try and convince Channel 4 to come to the Midlands. Obviously, it wasn't that good. And Stephen Knight was there, who wrote the Peaky Blinders, or who writes the Peaky Blinders. And he spoke to me and he said he really liked my piece, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, oh my God, that's Stephen Knight. And off he went. And then I got commissioned to write a piece that I've performed in France, in Cannes, which was lovely, at the site where the Cannes Film Festival is. I was like, oh my God, they don't normally let people like me into places like that. And Stephen Knight was there again. I was like, hello, Stephen Knight. It's like, hello, Casey, I remember you. And then I got this call from the BBC saying, do you like the Peaky Blinders? Someone from the BBC. I was like, I love the Peaky Blinders. Random call. I don't know you that well. And they said, we want you to write the poem for the Peaky Blinders. And at the time, I kind of thought that they decided they want a poem and they had a few poets in mind. And probably one of the biggest compliments I've had is I said, who else are you considering? And they said, no, nobody. We haven't decided we want a poem and come to you. We've seen you and decided we want one of your poems. I'm like, what? So yeah. And then the rest, as they always say, is history.
That's so exciting. What fun. And it just shows when you're getting your work out there, you never know who's going to see what you're doing and pick on it. Yeah, that's an amazing compliment. That's ace. And now you're like Birmingham's Poet Laureate. What? Tell us about that.
That.
Do you get paid for that, or is it classified?
You don't get paid to be a Poet Laureate, man. Well, no, that's a lie. You do get paid to be the Poet Laureate, the one who writes poems for the Queen. But I don't write poems for the Queen. And I have no intention of writing poems for the Queen. Yeah, it's not paid. It's not a paid role. It's an honorary role, and it is an honor, to be fair. So yeah, I think it's very self managed as well, in that they haven't gone, oh, you're the Poet Laureate, you have to do this. They've gone, you're the Poet Laureate, what are you gonna do? So I'm like, and my little mission statement is to bring more poetry to Birmingham, and to raise the profile of Birmingham through poetry. So yeah, that's my plan.
Nice. And speaking of poems, you've got a new book collection out, haven't you? Tell me a little bit about the collection, and maybe would you read one from it?
Yeah, so the new collection, which is due at some point in 2021, so I think June we're looking at, I'm saying I think. I know exactly when it's meant to be out, so I don't know why I'm acting like I don't know. Sounds cool, doesn't it? I think maybe June. I don't know, maybe June. You know, yeah. So I think June. And it's called Please Do Not Touch. And very briefly, it's about places like National Trust houses, museums, art galleries, all these places that have artifacts that say, please do not touch. And you look at them and they were taken from somewhere around the world. You know, this one's from Africa, that one's from Asia, this one's from North America. And you got the cheek to tell me to not touch. If somebody didn't touch it in the first place, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So yeah, this poem I'm going to read is called When Your Brother Died. And there were two brothers who they lived in a place called Shubra Estate in the Midlands. And one of them was basically, I say he's a pirate. I hope none of his long living relatives don't come and find me for this. But I just call him a pirate. He sailed around on a ship and came back with lots of people's stuff. So I don't know what else you call that other than a pirate. Right. His name was George. And when he died, his brother changed their whole life, spent all the money that his brother had taken from other people. So this poem's called When Your Brother Died. When your brother died, you spent his fortune on your vision, built your grand estate on the back of his stolen wealth, like it was yours, like it was his. He'd have loved it. Grecian taste, Oriental magnificent, how to dress, opportunistic betrayal so it may strut. How graceful can greed be? Who taught you to take so well? Which marauder unlocked your potential to unlock, relock, annex, asseverate, own? Did he know? Had he seen boomerangs before? When he threw you, could he foresee you would return as vulture, his future as carrion? How proud he would be. Cool. Yeah.
For your audience, everyone claps at home. That's good. Oh, well, like, there's been so much now, like growing, like really suddenly more of a greater awareness around, I feel like, with the whole Black Lives Movement and the stuff about the statue in Bristol. So it feels like it's something that really does need exploring, about how people who we might consider philanthropists, actually what did they bring, what did they build their wealth on? And was it the wealth of working classes, and was it the wealth of other nations that were pillaged? So yeah, that's really, really, really powerful stuff. I noticed that I saw when I was Googling you know, to find out a little bit more about you, I noticed that it said you've been named in the top 30 under 30s in Birmingham, someone to watch. Like, what was your journey towards writing poetry as like a young man?
Oh gosh. Fortunately, there are things you can't Google. So my journey to writing poetry, I've always written things. And when I was about 14, 15, I started taking writing music seriously. So writing rap music mainly, grime music. I wrote a little bit of stuff for some bands, mainly like outside of my area that I was sending and they were performing, which was cool. But I was writing quite angry, aggressive, negative music because in my head I was just reflecting the environment that I was in, and I kind of gave myself the like excuse that someone had to tell the story of where we were, but in many ways I was reinforcing a lot of the negatives. And so after a few people had made some very bad decisions and told me that, and basically quoted my own music to me as to why, you know, it's like you say in your songs. I'm going, oh God, is this the impact I'm having? I stopped writing for a long time, and I became a teacher many years after that. And I started working with a group of kids who didn't like English, didn't want to write, didn't want to do creative writing. And I said, I'll take them all and I'll make a group and we'll call it Bailey's Rap and Poetry, and we'll write rap and we'll write poetry. And then they started saying, oh Bailey, you write a poem for next week's session. You write us a rap for next week's session. So I'm going, oh God, okay. And started writing again and just kind of got that buzz. And then it was like open mic night here, open mic night there. And next thing you know, I'm just writing. And people are saying, oh, could you come and perform for us here? Or could you write something about this? And
yeah.
Here.
Well, it was like, So are you juggling like being a full-time teacher and poeting? And not just poeting actually. So like I saw that you'd had a play commission called Grind Bar, Grind Boy, the Birmingham Rep. Like when was that? How did that go? How was it? What was it about?
Yeah, so all of this stuff is just like I've just like fallen into stuff, and then I'm like, oh gosh, people say, oh, you're a playwright, and I go, I guess so, yeah. Which is what it was like when people asked me if I was a poet like 6 or 7 years ago. You're a poet, kind of, I guess. And the thing with the Birmingham Rep is I got onto a program with Apples and Snakes, big up Apples and Snakes always, and the Birmingham Rep. It was called Poetic Theatre Makers, and I was 100%. I had every intention of basically like blagging it and just doing like a one-man poetry show with a few little elements of music. I thought, I'm not doing like a proper theatre thing. And then there was Alia Hasina was on it, who's a legend. Somalia Seaton was one of the mentors, and Chris Thorpe was one of the mentors, who are like some amazing theatre makers. And they were just like not having it. They were like, no, this is like, you're going to make a piece of theatre. And people were saying to me, you got to write dialogue, and we want to see this and we want to see that. I was like, oh God, I don't know about all of this. But, you know, went through the process and just really started to enjoy it. And I realized there's so much that you can do with poetry, but there's also so much that you can't do. And there's so much that you might need somebody else engaged in the story, and you can't just have one person telling the story. And yeah, next thing I know, the Birmingham Rep commissioned the play. So the play is going on at the Rep and the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry. And the Belgrade have been like so helpful, and Corey Campbell from the Belgrade has given me so much support in the process. And then I ended up on the Bush Theatre in London, their emerging writers group. So now apparently I'm a playwright. I don't know what to do with myself.
I think like lots of people come into poetry because poetry often feels quite achievable because it can be quite short. And I recently had a woman who emailed me saying that she was out of work at the moment, but she was really interested in script writing. And script writing can sometimes seem a lot more daunting. But then it's like everyone's dream, let's write a script for Netflix, you know,
Yeah,
like bring the dollar. Like, we're all secretly thinking, could I write a script for Netflix? Would it be amazing? So I think it's good to hear that you've pushed yourself out your comfort zone and then begun that process. It's quite exciting to
yeah.
me.
And I think,
Go on.
I was just going to say, I think for me, my passion for like literature was always novels. It was always like extended stuff. I love reading novels, and I never really read poetry until I started writing poetry. But I tried to write, when I was at university, I tried to write a novel. I started about 4 times. I can't write. I can't write a novel. I could write, well, as you say, I could write a poem. Yeah, I could put like 15 lines together or something. Yeah, of course I can. So, and then it kind of, next thing you know, you're snowballing out of control and you're writing pages of things.
Yeah, because like we've had quite a number of solo shows at the Old Courts, the Arts Centre in Wigan, via our CTN connection, where it's like we work with Battersea Arts Centre and they send us different shows on this tour. And we had Conrad Murray up from Battersea, who did like a solo spoken word show. It was amazing. And we had Chris Thorpe up, who was doing some research about the idea of national pride and how you can feel national pride and the different ways that looks. And that to me feels like it links a little bit thematically with the book. Do you want to do another poem about the book?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so this poem is called When I Can't Hear the City. And the motivation for it is this discussion that we always have around whether people 100 years ago or 200 years ago should be judged on the morals that we have now. And I think in some ways it's an important discussion, but I think in many ways there are levels to what's right and wrong, and we should kind of always on a human level have some understanding of what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is called I Can't Hear the City. Water, running like children, whispering like traffic through double glazing. From the bench at Kedleston Hall, I hear grass crushed beneath city calloused feet. My spine, curved by concrete slabs, unravels in the presence of lifeless leaves. And still, even now, when I can't hear the city, I know it isn't silent. Blissful ignorance is a fallacy. The owners of land and life who inhabited this hall were never unaware. The burden of care can be carried by slaves, how I carry the sounds of the city. Heavy, always. Cool, thank you.
I read a tweet recently about someone who said the lecturer at uni, I think it might have been an American university, saying that my lecturer has now won't use the word slaves in our lectures. He talks about enslaved people, and I'm not saying that because I'm saying you shouldn't do slaves. I'm not. I just think it's, and I was like a bit like, oh, I'm going to try and use that language, you know, moving forward, like when I'm working with different groups, because there's something about the idea of, there's something about the word slave that kind of makes someone other, you know, whereas
dehumanized.
Yeah,
you get people and slaves. You don't see slaves as people. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think the idea of being an enslaved people is like useful, you know, in terms of how we think differently about things, and I really sense that sense of heaviness in the poem that you talked about, the water and the heaviness and how water moves. I really enjoyed that. Thank you, Qudsia. Super. What did I want to ask you about? I wanted to kind of ask you about your proudest moments as being a poet. Like, oh, you're like, what? You'd never said that to me before, Louise. I'm thinking, sorry, Qudsia. Like, is there any kind of moments where you've worked with people, or you've been performing, or something where you thought, oh, this is important, because what you're writing about are important, thought-provoking topics that we all need to think about when we visit art galleries and museums? Like, what are we seeing?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of proud moments, and a lot of moments that are kind of like that I found really surreal. Like, I'm kind of like, am I here? Like, is this happening? From like when Verve Poetry Festival were launching their program in, I think it was 2018, and I was one of the performers at the launch, and so was Liz Berry. And I feel like Liz Berry was like cast out of gold. Like, I didn't realize she was an actual human. I thought she was a mythical being, because like her poems, like genuinely, there are poems in her collection Black Country that I cannot read without crying. Like, she's phenomenal. And it was the first time I'd heard her perform, and hearing her with that, I don't know if you've heard Liz Berry perform, but she's got this proper like melodic Black Country twang. And I just felt a bit like surreal. And at that point I'd been performing up and down the place, and I felt quite established, but I was like, oh God, it's Liz Berry. So that was cool. I'd say probably my proudest moment was this year, I think. And it was like the start of the year when we could do things called traveling. I don't know if anyone remembers that.
What is this mythical thing you talk of? Traveling, moving?
I went on a plane in 2020. And I went to India in January, and I was invited to come to India and perform, and which is like wild in and of itself. And two things that happened there that were amazing. One was, I didn't realize the kind of organization that had set it up run the biggest media company in the state. So they've been pumping out information about this festival for weeks. So I land in India and I'm walking through this like festival, and people are going, "That's Casey Bailey." That's pointing at me, and they know who I am. And I'm thinking, this doesn't happen when I walk through Birmingham. People know who I am. But I performed this poem, which is from this collection, and it's called Viceroy. And the Viceroy was like the person that we used to put in a country to run the country on our behalf. And we had a Viceroy of India. And I performed this poem, and people came up to me and said, you know, they knew about viceroys and they knew about the British Empire, but they'd never considered the idea that a viceroy was a negative thing. And that my poem had like opened their eyes to the fact that actually in many ways what was done there wasn't great, and they could see the connection between how, you know, in India there are a lot of people who speak English who kind of, it's like a sign of class. Like, if you can't speak English, you're kind of deemed as lesser, even in another country. And that's a legacy that we left behind. Like, you know, you guys get to speak English, you guys, oh, you're like, you know, peasants. and people were really like emotional about it. And I thought, oh my God, when I was writing this, it was just a concept. I saw a picture in a house of a viceroy, and I thought, I really want to write about that. And now I'm here where it happened, talking to people whose lives it's affected. So that was a bit surreal.
It's a weird, different sort of privilege, isn't it, in a way? Like, when you write about something, it's like in one of my books, I write about sexual abuse, you know, because I'm looking at teenagers and stuff and the range of things that teenagers can and can't do. And I felt a real responsibility, because you're a bit like, you're thinking about something from your perspective, and then when you go out into the world, you don't know what your reader or your listener's going to think, do you? So yeah, that's like, and it proves how powerful poetry can be. Like,
yeah,
because like spoken word and poetry is really like becoming much more and more popular with the internet and everything. And I think like people think art doesn't really do anything, it can't change anything. But like that's like an example of where it can change thoughts and provoke
absolutely
discussion. And you said about Liz Berry. So for anyone watching at home who's not heard of Liz Berry, I found out about Liz Berry because of her writing in dialect. And I just think like it's so powerful to write in your own speech and to write with your own in your own language and dialect and accent. And when I read her work, I was like, it feels quite working class as well. So I felt like, I can, even though I'm from Wigan in the north, and you know, she's from Birmingham, I could see the joining together of the places. Would you like to finish with a poem?
Yeah, so my last poem, I might pronounce this wrong, but I won't know, so it'll be fine. It's called trompe-l'oeil, which is a French term for a painting or a piece of art which deceives the eye. And I saw a type of, you know, like where you walk past things and they change as you walk past them, a bit like optical illusion. And I learned about this in the National Trust House, and I was reading about this style of art. And then I walked into a room and there was a huge canvas of a man on a horse with a little black boy next to the horse with a metal collar around his neck. And it said in the like brochure or whatever they call it, the program or whatever it is, it's not a football game, Casey, the program. In the match day program, it said, whoever he was, I don't care who he was, such and such, and his page boy. And I thought, page boy, is that what we're going to call the boy? So then I started thinking about these things that appear in one way, but are actually something else. So this poem's called Trompe-l'oeil. The black boy with the metal collar is a page boy, chained like the horse he holds, a black beauty, a beast braced by the man he serves. Out of frame there is champagne pissing from the heavens, delicious and intoxicating. The statue lions have been roaring into the vacuum. Torn by grief of betrayal and deceit, they are animated in protestation, and here, in this lacuna between actuality and invention, the black boy in the collar is not a slave. Cool. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, like it's hard, like doing like a sort of like a live chat show thing like this, because when you have the privilege of listening to live poetry, that's the place where you listen to something, you're like, oh, like that's like I really want to think about that, rather than me having gone, oh, let's talk a bit more now. But if people do want to read it, where can they get your book? So it's coming out with Burning Guy in June, but you've got a book out with Verve Poetry Press, haven't you?
I have indeed, and big up Verve Poetry Press all the time. So I've got Adjusted out with Verve Poetry Press now, so you can get that. Best place to get it is from the Verve Poetry Press website.
Okay, super. Because after I'm going to have a break now, and then in the second half, I'm going to speak to Stuart, and we're going to have a little think about what he looks for in a poet. You know, so if there are people at home who want to get published and they're a bit like, I want to submit a pamphlet, like they've seen the sort of work you do and heard it, and it might be nice for them to buy your book and have a read and more of your work. That's basically what I'm saying. Buy Casey's book, people.
Buy the book.
Buy the book. Buy the old book, and then by the time you've read it, you can buy the new one then, can't you?
It sounds like a plan.
Super. Qudsia, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy life, because I know it's like everything's mental at the moment, and coming on Bad Apple. Hopefully we can get you up to the old courts, you know, when we're booking poets again and get to hear your work. That would be amazing in real life. Okay. Thanks for coming, Qudsia.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I'll say goodbye and I'll see you soon. Hello and welcome back to the part 2 of November's Bad Apple. So I'm really excited to be able to introduce to you to Stuart Bartholomew. Stuart is a publisher. He runs Verve Poetry Press. He's a really kind, lovely, inclusive, kind of supportive guy. And I just thought I'd invite him so we can find out a little bit more about what it's like, you know, like publishing poets and being involved with a poetry festival and just that kind of thing, really, for your pleasure. So let's welcome to this virtual stage. He's laughing, he's in the background. It is Stuart Bartholomew.
I am.
Hi,
oh, what a disappointment.
You're not a disappointment. You're not
I would be if I was watching. Yeah.
Welcome. So, your press is based in Birmingham.
Yeah.
Tell me about, how did you end up opening a press?
Well, yeah. So, in my later life, I've just been thinking things needed to happen in Birmingham. I was running a bookshop, and but I did start to get quite heavily involved in the poetry scene there, just as a kind of audience member. And we used to invite poets into the shop to perform and stuff. And it just occurred to me that the things that poetry community I thought needed, a festival, and then after the festival a press, just weren't there. There are good presses in Birmingham. Emma Press are brilliant. Nine Arches are in Rugby nearby. They're brilliant, but they weren't really focusing very hard on Birmingham poets. And so, you know, having the festival, having Birmingham poets perform at the festival, having Birmingham poets attend the festival, and then realising that none of them were in books, just felt wrong to me. And because they were great, you know, there's some great poets in Birmingham. So I've been a bookseller for 25, 27 years, and I kind of know stuff. And, you know, it's just nice when you know stuff that's useful. Don't know. You know, so I just thought, well, and knowing Emma and knowing Jane from Nine Arches, I just kind of thought, well, I could probably do that and do it so that Birmingham poets were kind of featured. My first 2 years were pretty much all Birmingham poets. Yeah. And then I ran out a bit, and now we're, while we wait for the next generation, and they don't, you know, they're all going off to better presses, I'm publishing other people. But well, yeah.
That's quite exciting for those who are not based in Birmingham. It's good to hear about like the other presses in Birmingham as well, because I love the Emma Press stuff.
Yeah,
because it's beautiful, isn't it? She just makes these amazing little anthologies and kids' books and all sorts.
Yeah.
And now,
she doesn't do collections, so that's one and why should she? You know, people should do what they like. She doesn't. So that's a bit of a gap anyway. But I think as well, she's looking nationally and also kind of Europeanly. That's a word. And so it's just in turn, there are Birmingham poets on her press, but not many, and not enough. And again, that's nothing to do with her. It's just to do with Birmingham.
Well, and it's just, I think it's the nature of like press is like a lot of the publishing industry is based down south. And like I'm thinking like Wigan, like we should have our own press. And it's exciting to see things open in Liverpool. And I know there's small presses in Yorkshire. And there's something about being local, you know, and also in terms of class. I mean, I chun on and on about being working class and stuff, but and I like all the classes, you know, the upper classes and the middle classes. I'm fine with all the classes. But what I'm thinking is like there's something about being local that the population therefore is more likely to need representation in some way.
Yeah. I think so. I think, you know, it's been really interesting just gradually getting to know poetry, because it really has been a late thing for me, and just realising how many people write poetry in the country. You know, it's madness. It's great, but it's madness. We had an open submission in May, just for 4 weeks, and we asked for finished books pretty much. We didn't say send us a sample, we said send us a full collection, it's all finished and we'll see what we like. And we got 500 submissions.
Wow.
You know, just books. This isn't, oh, I've written a poem, this is books of poetry. So, you know, there's a lot of people doing it for a lot of different reasons. I think people get a lot out of it. Personally, it's not all about, well, it's never about a career. It's, you know, it's not, doesn't pay enough to be a career, but you know, some people make it a bigger part of their life than others. But there's a big kind of need for poetry, learning about poetry, I think, is the big need. So when we do workshops at the festival, I'm going to fill you 20 minutes. When we do workshops at the festival, they're full in minutes. You know, some of them sell out in one day, and that's as important to people as sitting in an audience and hearing great poets perform.
Let me rewind a little bit to when you talked about having your 500 submissions. So there might be people watching at home who are writing and maybe have a few poems or maybe have collections, you know, and buckets full of this stuff. When you're reading your the submissions, what stands out for you? What are you looking at? Who do you want to publish?
Yeah, there's quite... I found that I'm better at it now than I was before we did the submissions, because actually reading 500 manuscripts focuses the mind, and you kind of get a sense of, no, I don't like that, and that's what I'm into. There's personal choice, there's what I like. I tend to like a bit more issues-based poetry. I definitely like poetry to be communicating rather than bamboozling. I don't get off on poetry that doesn't mean anything to me or to the reader. I'm quite varied, because I'm trying to show a breadth of stuff. I think that's something that defines us and defines the festival, is that we don't say we just do these kind of poets. I'm interested in dramatic poetry. I'm interested in you know, raucous, you know, sweary poetry, and or really beautiful poetry. You know, I'm interested in that full range. And I think, sorry, and because
exciting to hear.
Yeah, but because we're in Birmingham, you know, I've always felt that we had to be right for that city, and you know, certainly with a festival, our first thought was, what does the Birmingham Festival need to have? And it couldn't have those boundaries. With far too multicultural in Birmingham to get away with it. I've never been to any other festival. That's the other thing I should admit. But I have heard rumours. I've heard rumours of festivals in kind of rural tents, being kind of all white and quite old, and, you know, stuff that's good, but you know, I think people I know have been to those festivals and felt a bit odd or felt a bit like an outsider.
Yeah, because it's okay to be white and old, but you don't just want white and old, do you? You don't want toast all the
Yeah.
time. Sometimes
Well,
you want to
you
have
know,
a gatto.
if I don't like old white people, then I've got to shoot myself, really. So you know, that's where we are. But yeah, you know, I'm. It's about variety for me. It's about a breadth of voices, because that's where the freshness is. You know, I think when I think about what I like about poetry, I want stuff that surprises me a bit, tells me something I don't know, gives me a different angle, you know, and it's got that kind of freshness to it. And the other ingredient is that it's got to be open-hearted. You know, I think that's what we talk about quite a lot in the press, is just that nurturing part of poetry, and that part of poetry that is just outward looking rather than self-obsessed, you know, just a bit of that really as well.
That feels like a weird line to kind of negotiate, the idea of being
Yeah.
open-hearted and not self-obsessed, particularly if you're a bass poet. So I suppose there's like a little swing between looking inwards in order to...
Yeah, I think there is that. I mean, I think there definitely is that journey to the interior, that then you kind of bring something back and present it to a kind of needy audience who kind of find it useful and think, right, I'm going to make my journey now. So there is that mixture. But I think, you know, it's about kind of open-heartedness in terms of poetry as an activity, I think. And just, you know, the best poets always help other poets, and I think that's quite an important part of what they do. I think the other thing I should mention about the submissions is that actually I needed people to convince me that they wanted to kind of work hard to get their book across to people, and you know, some people didn't really like that because it sounded a bit businessy and a bit you know, demanding. But you know, there's no point putting a book out just to sit in a bag. You know, there's got to be, there are different ways of doing it. Some people are less able than others, have to go through different routes to communicate, but I think that communication part is still really important. And just you know, I think they needed to convince me that they were that serious about their poetry, rather than just, oh, toss these off, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a hobby, but I'm not really going to kind of, I'm not like passionate about people reading it or something.
Yeah.
And let me pause you there, because I'd really like to hear from one of the poets who's got, now it's Sean, so Sean got a full pamphlet coming out.
The full collection coming out in April, called Sitfang Glasgow. It's going to be brilliant. And Sean's a great poet, and he was one of the not many, but there are a few people I'd heard of when they submitted, and I did a little dance when Sean submitted. So.
Cool. So we'll hear one of his poems now, and we'll have a little chat about it. So Sean Wai Keung, am I saying that right? Do you know?
Sean Wai Keung.
Okay, yeah, cool. Is a poet based in Glasgow in Scotland. His pamphlet, You Are Mistaken, won the 2016 Rialto Open Pamphlet Competition. The Rialto is like a magazine that's like got a good reputation, so that's quite cool. And I'll put like links to his social media and stuff in the chat later on, so if you want to follow him, you can do. So this is one poem from his collection, and it's about Tomb Sweeping Day. So if you don't know about this, it's a day off that you get in a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, like China and Hong Kong and Taiwan and Thailand, where you get the day off to go and visit your ancestral graves. And it's kind of a little bit like a poem about grandparents as well, and family.
Tomb Sweeping Day, Glasgow, 2020. The thoughts of me Papa Migungu. I tried to imagine it once, what it would be like, living over half your life not fluent in the local language. How much more intelligent you'd have to become at things like social cues and body language, at reading the expressions on faces more times correctly than incorrectly. If you failed, well, the consequences could be... I always thought I had a slick imagination for that sort of thing. Even as a kid, I would flick through the world atlas, looking up faraway places, wondering what languages they would speak, what food they would eat, if there'd be anybody there who looked like me. Meanwhile, down the road at the spring bamboo, they would sit together in silence at the exact same time each and every day, thinking inconsequential thoughts, but doing so in their own language. There'd be no need for any words between them both. Because she knew that he had already put the right change in the till, and he knew that she had already twisted the dial in the fryer from the circle diagram to the one-line diagram, and they both knew that in a few moments' time they would both stand up, walk to the front door, flip the sign from the red side reading closed to the blue side reading open.
Wow. I really enjoyed listening to that for the first time. I think partly because, like you talked about, when you read, you want to hear stories that you've not heard before. And I didn't thinking about Tomb Sweeping Day, and I like Scottish poets, so I was a bit like,
I mean, Sean's a wonderful kind of mix, Jeremy. He's never lived anywhere else, you know, and he's got this kind of Scottish brogue coming out of him, isn't he? It's really charming. But he's got this heritage that, you know, he's interesting because he seems to have more questions than answers when it comes. A lot of people who've got kind of a kind of exotic heritage or a heritage from other countries, they've found out about it and they know all about it and they've got bits of the language and, you know, they're kind of cushioned by it. But when I read Sean or talk to Sean, I always think he seems a bit kind of tragically removed, never to be recovered, you know, from, and he goes to these places and feels like a complete outsider, and but he still enjoys kind of finding little bits of culture that he can relate to and kind of and try and understand. So it's quite an interesting combination.
Yeah, I think ploughing into your family's journey and exploring those issues is so interesting. And my dad's Scottish, but I don't have anything to do with the Scottish side of the family. And like, as a writer, I found exploring that through fiction, because I'm writing a novel at the moment, but like for people at home and stuff, like you can explore it through fiction. You can think about your characters journeying through these countries that you've maybe not been to or have this connection with. And and I think that's a good one to set right.
Absolutely. But I think definitely. But I think with the poetry, it does open up thoughts you've never had, you know, and to actually read a poem. And Sean's writing's quite straightforward in a lot of ways. It's really peacefully written, I always think, when I read his stuff. But it's not trying to be too clever. It's not throwing words at you've never heard before. But he just kind of shows you things quite quietly that you just think, I've not even considered that would happen. And that's just a really great thing that poetry can do and all writing can do.
Like I love how, oh God, my mind went blank then. I was like thinking like, it's just gone. It's totally blind. These things happen. It might come back to me. So thinking about the festival then, tell us a little bit about, because Wigan had a literature festival for 10 years and we're in the process really of different organisations wanting to start a literature festival up again. And I know you've talked about not wanting to be like you've never been to another one. And so,
I'll come to yours if you have.
Oh yeah, you can come. You can come to ours. You're welcome up north. So what sorts of stuff's in your literature festival?
Well, it's not a literature festival.
Okay.
That's the first thing.
Okay.
There's already a Birmingham Literature Festival that's been going for 2 decades and more, and it's very good. It's run by Writing West Midlands, who've been really helpful to me. They're a literature festival, and because they're doing literature rather than just poetry, I just felt they weren't doing enough poetry for a city, and so the idea, Verve is a poetry festival. That's, your novel's not coming to Verve.
If I ever finish it.
Because there's so much poetry to see already, and and if you start doing other stuff, you don't see enough of the poetry. So that's why we formed, and we kind of, we're 6 months apart from Birmingham Lit Festival, we kind of existing quite nicely. They've started doing a bit more poetry, I've noticed, at Birmingham Lit Fest since we came along.
They've seen how successful you are.
Yeah, I think so. And it started in the bookshop. It started as something. I worked there. They were the venue, and I didn't know what I was doing, to be fair. But I think that was a good thing, because I did things that people don't normally do, apparently, quite accidentally, like having Outspoken Press showcase followed by Helen Moore, and apparently you don't do that. I don't know. And
different styles of poets.
Yeah, and I don't really recognise a lot of, I think people talk a lot about spoken word being something different to poetry, or page poetry being something new, and someone I respect who helped me a lot was Bogdan Piasecki, who's a Polish poet who lives in Birmingham, and he's involved with Apples and Snakes, and he always talks about poetry as being a spectrum, and at one end is someone who performs, who, if you try to write down what they do, it would just evaporate and just be nothing. But actually, they're still amazing, because when you watch them, they do this amazing, they're amazing. And at the other end is someone who writes poetry on a piece of paper, and you just couldn't possibly read it out, because nothing of it translates into verbal language. And, I'm quite happy for those things to happen. I think what's interesting is what's in the middle, where people are kind of, an Outspoken Press are a good example of that, as poets who write really amazingly. You can read their poems and get a lot, but then you see them and, it's something else again. And, I like that kind of the sway between those two things, between the book and the performance. A lot of poets in Birmingham, when I kind of started talking to them about publishing, they were like, I don't know if my poems would work in a book, and there's this big horror about the thought of, A, having to make final decisions about lines that they'd always just change when they like, and B, just how would it read, and actually, I think people get too hung up on that. For me, you might see a live band and then their CD's different and it's not as good, or it's better, or, it happens a lot.
Yeah.
And I just think people who can't get to your gig might want to read your book.
Yeah.
The story. It's just another way of getting your poetry out there.
I was the same. I pushed away having a book for like 10 years because I didn't feel comfortable.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah, now I've got like 3. Let's have a little listen at another one of your poets before we start to wrap up our discussion today. But I've really enjoyed having you on. So this next woman, I found her quite gentle. Let me have a little look at her written. Oh yeah. Qudsia Akhtar is a Manchester-based poet whose poems have been in Acumen, Tower Poetry Anthology, a few other things, and she's currently doing her PhD at the University of Salford. It's exciting to me to see the whole range of people who write poetry. You're writing it in an academic setting, or like open mic nights, all ages, people just come in and reading the poems about like birds in the garden. I just like the range of stuff.
Yeah.
Let's have a little look at Qudsia then.
Hi, my name is Qudsia, and I am going to read two poems that are based on the female experience. These two poems are a part of a larger collection which will be released by Verve Poetry Press in 2022. I tend to write a lot about the complexities surrounding the British Pakistani experience, and I delve into personal and collective histories, as well as explore the relationship between the self and the other, trying to understand a hyphenated identity, British Pakistani. So I'm going to read my first poem, which is called Shikwa, and Shikwa translates as to complain. So here goes. Shikwa. Shut the day out and absorb the music. Women crushing chilies in their fist, fueling the fire. I said listen as they lead the bulls across to plough the paddy field. My grandma is one of the women. Shut the day out and absorb the music. Flustered red-hot children cry as the women walk, baskets balanced on the head, full of chapatis to feed the men. My grandma is one of the women. Shut the day out and absorb the music of the colourless compromise where women are told men only fertilise the soil. And them. Shut the day out and absorb their stare. The eyes sing shattered songs that lose their range when far from home. My grandma is one of the women. And the second poem that I'm going to read is called Inheritance. Inheritance. My captains carry ancient lines of dark rooms, dense with hookah, chai and madmen who bang on the daff and chant. Ordered merd gudozik malika jaigi. A woman will take a man to hell. My captains are fed, wed to speculative phrases, bound in his interpretations, fluent with accusations. I am made of his rib, yet I deserve his spit. Ancient lines of moonlit nights, prayers and men who gather to recite. Ordered merd godozik malika jaigi. My captains bear the burden of hell, him and hope, for my hands hold the creation of sin. So he points his finger to the thick text of rulings, circling vague phrases, and says, recite. Ordered merd godozik malika jaigi. A woman will take a man to hell. So those are my poems, and I hope you enjoyed them. So thank you, yeah, so bye, thank you.
Oh, like she's got such a quiet but charismatic presence. You know, like a shyness, like coupled with a real intenseness, like that anger. Have you seen it before?
No, not at all. So literally, it was she submitted, and you know, her poems just leap from the page, so she's got that in her armoury as well. But it's great to see her read and to see that kind of, again, it's the quietness. A lot of people write quite angry poems when they start to discuss feminism, or they start to discuss, you know, the wrongs of society, and I think there's a lot of power in that kind of quiet intelligence, isn't there, that she's got.
Yeah, it's amazing. And she said in like, men only fertilise. I was like, oh, I was just imagining these men weeing on the crop, you know, like, so yeah, there's just something really nice. I'm looking forward to reading her stuff when it comes out. Her stuff comes out much later, doesn't it? So Sean's is coming out in April.
Sean's is next April, and then hers is it'll be early in 2022. But yeah, it's one of those things, I think, where with the 500, you know, it was a case of I can't do everything I want to do here, you know, but there were some poets I just felt I had to kind of see if they didn't mind waiting a bit longer just so I could.
Yeah. So you've got loads of amazing pamphlets. For people who don't know, pamphlets is like it's a shorter collection, it's not as long.
Yeah.
And collections, which is like a whole book of poems. You've got loads on your website, and I'm going to put the link in into the chat and everything. And it's really affordable, so I think you should just get on the website and just like buy a couple of books. I mean, you can buy mine if you want to, but I can give you not Louise, so let's have a look at some poets who you've not read before, and you know, just do something new, because I think like these two poets have kind of shown as an example how accessible the collections you're picking, but not accessible as like a way of dumbing down, just kind of like you said, you want people who don't bamboozle, who you can follow what they're trying to say to you.
I think that's pretty key. I think if you're going to, I think I read a few things that obviously had really big kind of purposes to them, but they were written in such a way that I just didn't know what they were saying about it. And so that's a tragedy, isn't it? So I just think it doesn't have to be easy, but it just needs to be something that you can get something out of, I suppose.
Oh, thank you, Stuart. Thank you for agreeing to come on my
thanks
little
for having me. Do anything for you, Louise.
Oh, thank you. Like celebrities. I've really enjoyed listening to hearing just about how your thought process around poetry, and I just thank you for doing the work you're doing and allowing like loads of people across the country to kind of publish the work. Okay. So I hope to see you at the festival maybe next year, COVID allow, you know.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah. And if not, I'm sure I'll see you online and I'll be able to read the stuff. Okay, thank you, Stuart.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
If you've enjoyed watching the Old Courts live and you'd like to make a donation to support the work we do, please head over to www.theoldcourts.com/donate. This year's been incredibly difficult for most arts organisations, and we're no different. But with a huge effort and support from you and from our funders, we've managed to secure our organisation and the jobs of every staff member. We've also provided 343 artists with paid work for the Old Courts Live. And our volunteers have delivered over 700 food parcels and made 600 calls to isolated local residents. But the battle isn't over yet. We're currently closed to the public with zero income, and we don't know how long this closure is going to last. If you can help by making a donation, then you're helping to secure your arts centre. We're hoping to be around for a long, long time.